Hello everyone, Fred here. In this installment of TPP Dynamite, I'm going to be reviewing the young adult mystery novel One of Us is Back by Karen McManus. First things first though, if you haven't already, let me encourage you to subscribe to my channel. I post film, book, and TV series reviews. I do opinion pieces on entertainment, news, and affairs. I'm also an author of adult and young adult mystery novels. To date, I've released 3 books: The Women in White, The Lethal List, and most recently, Textbook Murder. They're all on sale now, and there are purchase links in my video description below. With that in mind, and without further ado, welcome to my mildly spoilery review of Karen McManus's YA mystery novel, One of Us is Back. The third time's a charm. It's been almost 2 years since Simon died in detention, and the aftermath has been hard to shake. First, the Bayview 4 had to prove they weren't killers. Then a new generation outwitted a vengeful copycat. Now the entire Bayview crew is back home for the summer, and everyone is trying to move on. Only this is Bayview, and life is never that simple. At first, the mysterious billboard seems like a bad joke. Time for a new game, Bayview. But when a member of the Bayview crew disappears, it's clear that this game is serious, and whoever's in charge isn't sharing the rules. Or maybe there aren't any. Bronwyn, Cooper, Addie, Nate, Maeve, Phoebe, Knox, Louise, Chris, everyone's a target. And now that someone unexpected has returned to Bayview, things could start getting deadly. The thing is, Simon was right about secrets. They all come out eventually. And Bayview has a lot it's still hiding. Okay, first, the good. One of Us is Back is written from the viewpoints of Nate, Addie, and Phoebe. There was some fan complaint about Karen's using those characters as opposed to other fan favorites, especially since this is supposedly the last book in the Bayview series and possibly the last time we'll hear from the Bayview group for the foreseeable future. But I'm here to tell you that the narration choices were spot on here, considering the type of story that was being told. A major part of this book revolved around Jake Reardon's return, his backstory with Simon Kelleher, and a huge secret from his past. And given Jake's history with Addie, this book wouldn't have landed with the proper emotional weight without spotlighting Addie's voice. Another major story thread was the fallout upon Phoebe and her sister Emma after their haptic mutual decision at the end of One of Us is Next to protect their little brother Owen by lying for him when they knew he was technically responsible for Brandon Weber's death. And that story thread wouldn't have hit with the proper emotional weight if we hadn't been able to watch it play out from Phoebe's point of view. Nate was not as major a contributor as Addie and Phoebe to the main story, but Nate is the one main character from the Bayview saga who, at the end of One of Us is Next, had the most uncertain future and the most growing left to do. Nate also happens to be maybe the most fun character to read in these books, so I really thought that using his voice here was a good decision for both of those reasons. From a character and dialogue standpoint, this book is exceptionally well written. Karen's biggest strength in her writing is crafting strong characters and strong dialogue between them, and that talent is very well displayed here. The main characters in One of Us is Back are all very well fleshed out. Nobody really does anything without reasons. Even though those reasons are sometimes very foolish, they still make sense given the nature of the characters presented. The characters' dialogue, deliberate silence, and even internal stream of consciousness all land very potently, so that even when you disagree with the decision that a character makes, you often at least sympathize with it a little. Basically, these characters and their worlds all feel real and relatable. This novel's central mystery wasn't the best, nor was it as good as the ones from One of Us is Lying and One of Us is Next, but it was still very good. It took a long while to get going. I was able to guess the identity of the primary antagonist a long while before it was ultimately revealed on page, and the book did reveal the motive for that antagonist's actions quite a while before the final confrontation. But that said, the mystery still unfolded very well. It still had plenty of mind-blowing twists and turns that I definitely did not see coming, and that made the last 30 or so percent of this book an absolutely unput-downable read. One of Us Is Back does a very powerful job of meaningfully bringing the Bayview saga full circle. Karen said in at least one interview that she planned to end this series with One of Us Is Next, but later got the idea to write One of Us Is Back based upon a subplot between Simon and Jake that her agent told her to drop from One of Us's line for pacing reasons. That plot line, which involves Simon's learning that Jake is actually the son of a man with whom his mother was having an adulterous affair, that Jake actually murdered this man to hold on to his life of privilege with his mother and her husband, and that his mother's husband covered up that murder, was originally included in One of Us's line to more thoroughly explain how Jake and Simon came to eventually be partners in framing the Bayview 4, and why Jake was so willing to help Simon carry out his scheme in the first place in One of Us's line. I agree with Karen that plot line probably would have been too messy to include in One of Us's line, but it forms the backbone of the central mystery in One of Us Is Back, and because of that, this book feels like a perfect closing of the loop on a trilogy of books that have all, to some degree, revolved around Simon's legacy in Bayview. One of Us Is Back also does a very solid, though very safe and ultimately hallmarky job of closing the stories of all main characters and many side characters from One of Us's line and One of Us Is Next. Karen McManus is the queen of happy endings in YA novels, and this one does not break that pattern. Nate and his father find their way back to each other. Addie and her mother rebuild their relationship. Addie and Vanessa, the girl who bullied Addie and later Cooper all throughout One of Us's line, make up. Cooper and Chris sort of make up with Vanessa also. Phoebe's family is made whole again in that she, Emma, and Owen are close once more, and in that they're all close to their mother. It's even implied that Phoebe's mom might have some fresh romance in her future. Phoebe herself gets together with Knox. Those are just a few examples. This book really did seem intent on settling every major personal issue and even most minor personal issues from One of Us's line and One of Us Is Next. I think the only such issue that doesn't get a mention of being settled definitively was the drama between Cooper and his father from One of Us's line. Okay, now the bad. The biggest problem with One of Us Is Back was just how unnecessary it seemed. When I first read One of Us's line, that book felt like a complete story with no need for sequels, even given the omission of the Simon-Jake plotline. Karen McManus has said herself that she is a standalone writer and that she never planned for sequels to One of Us's line. One of Us's line had its problems, but it was an amazing, almost genre-defining story with a satisfying conclusion. Simply put, One of Us's line felt like a main event of a book. One of Us Is Next felt like an encore. It didn't move the needle in the same way as One of Us's line, and the overall tale just was not as good, but it was still a great book that worked very well as a peek into the continuing lives of the main characters from One of Us's line, while also introducing some cool new characters and building a riveting mystery around Simon's legacy of weaponizing online revenge chat forums. One of Us Is Back felt like an after show. One of Us Is Next did an almost perfect job of concluding the Bayview story. The only true dangling thread at the end of that book was the reveal that Owen Lawton was technically the mastermind behind Brandon Weber's death. And even that didn't feel like a major unresolved issue because Owen was a 12-year-old kid who didn't really know what he was doing and probably wouldn't have been found culpable either legally or in the court of public opinion if the truth ever got out. So it never truly seemed like One of Us Is Next needed or deserved a sequel, and One of Us Is Back did not make me feel differently about that. Most of the time, it felt like One of Us Is Back's main purpose was to do little more than bring closure to the personal stories of characters from the previous two books. The entire first 40% plays out like a massive exposition dump intended to catch the audience up on what happened in the first 2 books, and it is full of trivial slice of life stories regarding the main characters of those first 2 books. The build-up of the mystery and its execution felt far less organic and moving than both did in One of Us is Lying and One of Us is Next. Now again, we are talking about Karen McManus, so the exposition and the slice of life bits are written very well from a character and dialogue standpoint, but it still doesn't change that the book feels rather unnecessary and inferior to the first 2 in the series. I did not like the direction One of Us is Back took with retconning Addie to be bi-curious and reintroducing Keeley from the first 2 books as her sudden love interest. That development came from so far out of left field, and it was just such a head-scratcher considering that neither Addie nor Keeley have ever read that way before. I wonder if Karen decided to include that plot point to offset some of the tension from Addie's storyline and to ensure that Addie's entire character arc in this book wouldn't be too one-note by focusing only on her dealing with Jake drama. But either way, the Addie and Keeley thing disappointed me. I really think Addie's romantic plot would have worked better if it had been constructed around her continuing to build a relationship with Daniel, her love interest from One of Us is Next. I think there could have been a deeper, more poetically resonant nature to doing things that way. Addie's confronting and getting over her toxic relationship with Jake while building a more legitimate relationship with an honorable and stable man like Daniel. I really think that would have worked better for this book. Then there's Phoebe. Phoebe Lawton has been my least favorite main character throughout these 3 books. Karen has done a very good job of fleshing her out and explaining why she is the way she is. Phoebe is a very well-developed character, but she's still always read to me as the shallowest, most selfish, most toxic main character whom Karen has written in any of her books thus far. That was heavily on display in One of Us is Next, and unfortunately it was heavily on display again in One of Us is Back. So suffice it to say that I was not thrilled with her arc in this book. At the end of One of Us is Next, Phoebe was starting to grow past being the garbage human she'd been all throughout that book, but One of Us is Back basically undoes all of that development by making her fall apart with self-loathing and paranoia due to how she's been keeping Owen secret. So now she's always lying to her friends or keeping them at a distance for fear that they'll eventually figure it out. She's in love with Knox but refuses to get with him because she feels guilty for lying to him. She also doesn't want Knox to date anybody else because she's still in love with him. She's trashy to people in her life for no reason at all besides her own self-pity and self-loathing. She suspects that Owen might be a budding sociopath after getting away with causing Brandon's death. She's mean to Owen every time he displays behavior she thinks might indicate growing darkness inside of him. But she still refuses to just talk honestly with him about any of it. Yeah, this is just so annoying. For about 95% of this story, she is just so annoying. Granted, by the end, Phoebe has begun to turn some of it around and figure out her life, but I almost get the impression with her that she may never fully learn her lesson because of how, at the very end of the book, she intentionally withholds information from the police that could lead to the capture of this book's primary and secondary antagonists who escape justice in the final act. Phoebe does this because she's developed a soft spot for the primary antagonist. Never mind that said antagonist's actions led to the accidental death of one person and the straight-up murder of a second person in this book. Never mind that said antagonist's partner in crime literally tries to murder Nate and suggests murdering Cooper and Luis near the end of this book. It's just so insensitive to Nate, Cooper, and Luis particularly for Phoebe to take that sort of attitude of developing a soft spot for the antagonist and allowing the antagonist to go. And it just left me thinking, this girl will never learn, will she? She can't live unless she's keeping secrets from somebody. Above all else, what frustrated me about Phoebe's arc was how it felt so unnecessary and blown so far out of proportion. The whole Owen cover-up never seemed like that big of a deal to me. It seemed so irrational for Phoebe to want to guard the secret so fiercely, and it never seemed right for Phoebe to feel as guilty or paranoid as she did because of it. Then again, maybe that was the lesson Karen was trying to teach the audience, that the truth needs to be told, that lying only creates bigger problems, that keeping secrets only inflates a balloon of misery inside of you until it ultimately bursts and destroys you. And that's a very good lesson to learn, but it still doesn't mean I have to like Phoebe or her arc, and I don't. Finally, this is a little technical nitpick, but I'm mentioning it because it informs the backbone of this entire book. One of Us is Back only even happens because Jake Reardon is released from a juvenile facility on bail and given a new court trial because of juror misconduct when it's discovered that a juror from his first trial illegally publicized details from that trial. But only adults have jury trials with conviction possibilities. Juveniles aren't tried or convicted in court. They have contests that are heard by judges. One of Us is Back makes clear that Jake was not tried as an adult, meaning he wouldn't have even gone before a jury, and there wouldn't have been any juror misconduct to compromise any conviction. So Jake probably would have wound up in juvenile hall or the Department of Juvenile Justice, and once he reached age 18, assuming he still had time left on his sentence, he then probably would have had to go through a hearing before being considered eligible for transfer to prison. I get that that's a minor plot hole and a complicated matter of legalese. It doesn't make this book any less enjoyable, but I do think it's worth mentioning as a negative point because without it, the main action in the book likely wouldn't have even occurred. Alright, brass tacks. One of Us is Back is a well-written, enjoyable read, the last one-third or so of which is an unput-downable thrill ride that concludes with near-perfect happy endings for every main character whom Karen McManus has introduced in the Bayview saga. But it does have its minor plot holes. Its mystery isn't as solid as the ones from the first two books in the series. Some of the character arc material is frustrating, and the whole book felt like an exposition-laden after-show to the main event of One of Us is Lying and the slightly lesser encore of One of Us is Back. Bottom line, read the book if you're compelled to see how the Bayview series ends, and if you want to see how the main characters from the first two books find final happiness. But skip it if you're not. I give Karen McManus's One of Us is Back 3.5 cronuts out of 5. At any rate, let me know what you all think about One of Us is Back. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree? How do you feel about the end of the Bayview series? Sound off in the comments below. Meanwhile, if you like this video, don't forget to leave a like, click subscribe, ring that bell, and hey, follow me on social media as well. So long.